الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So as we continue discussing the book Bulugh Maram by Hafidh Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, and in the chapter that he titled Kitab At-Tahara, and as for the specific chapter, Bab, the chapter of Qada al-Haja. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah that I mentioned several hadith regarding this discussion regarding Bab Qada al-Haja, and today inshallah ta'ala we will try to discuss the two remaining hadith or the remaining hadith of this particular chapter, bi'idhnillahi tabaraka ta'ala. So the hadith will be read and then we go through discussing the hadith and the ahkam that can be taken from them.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Hadith 93, narrated Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam asked the residents of Quba what had earned them the praise of Allah. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Indeed, Allah praises you." They replied, "We use water after cleaning the private parts with stones." Reported by Al-Bazzar with a Da'if, weak chain of narrators. Its asl, basic meaning, is in Abu Dawood and At-Tirmidhi. Ibn Khuzaima graded it Sahih, authentic, from the Hadith of Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, without mentioning the stones.
So this is the hadith that after rahimahullah mentioned Ibn Hajar in relation to this discussion. So the hadith that have been mentioned, he states, and Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, أن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام سأل أهل القباء. So the Prophet ﷺ asked the people of Quba, فقالوا, regarding certain matters, فقالوا, then their response, إننا نتبع الحجارة الماء. So they mentioned as their response that we would follow up after the use of hijara, the use of stones, with water. So we'll use water after the use of hijara, regarding for them cleaning of themselves after the use of the toilet. Then they mention, then he states, رواه بزار بسند ضعيف. He mentioned the hadith is collected by Al-Bazzar. Then he states بسند ضعيف, but the isnad is weak. وأصله في أبي داود والترمذي, and that the asl, the root of this hadith, that it is found in Abu Dawood and also At-Tirmidhi. Then he states وصحه ابن خزيمة, and of those who have authenticated hadith, Ibn Khuzaima, من hadith أبي هريرة, from the hadith of Abu Huraira ta'ala anhu, بدون ذكر الحجارة. So the hadith of Abu Huraira, there is no mention of hijara. So it mentioned that they would just use of, as I mentioned, that the hadith of Ibn Khuzaima without the mention of hijara, of the use of any stones. So that's concerned the hadith that are to be discussed, those two hadith, or some may deem to be one hadith. So the first hadith we see it as hadith of Ibn Abbas, and the second hadith, the hadith of Abu Huraira. So as for the hadith of Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhu, and radiyallahu anhuma, where he said that the Prophet ﷺ called, that the Prophet ﷺ that he asked, Quba, he asked the people of Quba regarding a matter, and then they responded in by stating that we would use water after stones. As for the first hadith, that is the hadith of Ibn Abbas, that they mentioned regarding concerning that hadith, is collected by Bazzar. And when he mentioned this particular hadith, that when this hadith is mentioned, that they state Rawahu Bazzar, and is also found in a book that's called Al-Astar, which is like a summary of the book of Bazzar. The book of Bazzar is not in print or incomplete. So the ulama of the past will somewhat summarize the book of Bazzar. So the book of Bazzar, it is somewhat printed, is called Bahr al-Zakhar. That what is in print now is around 20 volumes. But the book is, so before one of the ulama somewhat summarized that book as the book of Zawahid. So they mentioned that book, it is the book that's called Al-Astar. So it's like a summary of the book of Bazzar. Then I mentioned the hadith of this, they mentioned concerning, as for this particular hadith that is mentioned here, that they stated that they called Hadathana Abdullah ibn Shabib, called Hadathana Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz, قال وجدت في الكتاب أبي and Zuhri and Ubaydullah ibn Abdullah and Ibn Abbas رضي الله عنهما. Then he mentioned hadith with the call نزلت هذه آية, that is verse, it was في آل Quba, that a particular ayah was revealed in relation to the people of Quba, where Allah subhanahu mentioned فيه رجال يحبون أن يتطهرون والله يحب المتطهرين. So it mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala state this type of praise, this praise toward the people of Al Quba, that they are men who likes to be, who love and enjoy being in a state of purity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who are pure, the English rendering. So they mentioned that if it was then the Prophet ﷺ called Salahum, the Prophet ﷺ, he asked the people of Quba why this verse was mentioned regarding them as a praise to them. فقال إننا, and I mentioned that we would use water after stone. In some of the narration of the hadith, that it mentioned, like in my book it mentioned here, and Ibn Abbas أن النبي عليه السلام سأل أهل قباء فقالوا. Then in other prints of the book Bulugh Maram, in other prints, that they mentioned hadith as, and Ibn Abbas رضي الله عنهما أن النبي عليه السلام سأل أهل قباء فقال إن الله يثنى عليكم. So that part, إن الله يثنى عليكم, it is not mentioned in some prints. So then that's concerning that matter. So that's concerning the context of that hadith. So the context of what the Prophet ﷺ have questioned, or somewhat that asks further regarding why these people were being praised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding certain qualities that they possess. So they mentioned that, then they explained. So it shows that regarding concern the Prophet ﷺ, that it shows, if the hadith is said to be da'if, that with us that the hadith, it shows that the Prophet ﷺ, with this ayah being revealed, that he didn't know exactly what was the reason why those people of Quba was being praised. So it showed the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't knew everything. He only knew, so of the things of the unseen, he knew of things that was made known to him of the unseen. So in this matter, why those people were being praised, he was unclear of the reason. When he asked, then he was made aware that they would have this practice of whenever that they would combine between water and stone. They'll combine between stone and water in cleaning of themselves. So as for the hadith, that we mentioned that the hadith in its more longer version, then it mentioned from the hadith, the ulama, they have a discussion regarding this hadith, where Bazzar himself also state, قال Bazzar, after the hadith, لا نعلم أحد, that we do not know of anyone, رواه عن زهري إلا محمد ibn Abdul Aziz, ولا أنه إلا ابنه. So you find that he mentioned that as for Zuhri, the one who narrated upon Zuhri, who is Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz, that is the only one that have narrated this hadith on Zuhri. And also the one who came after him, who's his son, also the same thing. So it shows regarding concerning that with this particular hadith, that you find that individuals in the hadith, that they are the only one who narrate upon a person, like a single narrator. So call that is the one that said munfarid. So the hadith that is said to be that gharib or fi'i infirad, where one person narrating a person, and that is and in this case somewhat questionable. They mentioned that qult, it is stated regarding that isnaduhu da'if. That is isnad is said to be da'if. The reason why the hadith is said to be da'if, this he says Muhammad in it, Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz ibn Umar al-Zuhri wa matruk. So this narrator was Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz ibn Umar al-Zuhri, that he said to be matruk. So it's kind of this ruling or this judgment on this person, who this narrator, Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz, then to say is matruk is something which is a harsh type of criticism of the narrator, where his hadith is considered to be very weak. His hadith, it will be classed, it will be ruled as very weak. They mentioned that Al-Haythami fi Majmu' Zawahid قال رواه بزار وفيه. So of those who have commented upon this hadith, we have of them Al-Haythami in his book Majma' Zawaid, where he mentioned, where he state رواه بزار وفيه محمد ibn Abdul Aziz ibn Umar ضعفه Bukhari. So of those who have criticized this narrator, Bukhari والنسائي, and also Nasa'i وغيرهما, and others. So you have criticism of this narrator who they said to be matruk, that Bukhari have criticized him, Imam Bukhari, and also Imam Nasa'i have criticized this particular narrator. Then he mentioned that وَبِهِ أَلَّلَهُ, also of those who have criticized this hadith, Ibn Hajar. So Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimullah in his book Talkhis al-Habir also have criticized this hadith. Second, after criticism of this hadith, they mention also in it Abdullah ibn Shabib. Abdullah ibn Shabib also is in this hadith. So they mention that mutakallim fi, this narrator also is mutakallim, that there is some discussion regarding this person. We find that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, when they mention Abdullah ibn Shabib, ضعيف, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah have stated that this person, that is Abdullah ibn Shabib, that is ضعيف, is a weak narrator. But he said the hadith have different turuq. He said the hadith turuq ukhra. So as for the second hadith, that they mentioned that أما الحديث أبي هريرة, that رواه Abu Dawud and others, that the wording of that particular hadith he mentioned concerning that with this hadith, that Abu Dawud rahimahullah ta'ala in this narration he mentioned, and Abi Huraira radiyallahu anhu قال كان النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام إذا أتى الخلاء أتيته بما في تور أو ركوة فاستنجى or fastanji. So the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned regarding that, the hadith in Abu Dawud, which is the point, they mentioned that Abu Huraira anhu, who mentioned that when the Prophet ﷺ, that I will bring for him when he goes to the call of nature, that I will bring for him, that I take to him water fi tur, which is kind of somewhat a vessel, a small vessel, ina sagir min jild, that min nuhas, that is like a metal, small metal container. Regarding tur, then they mention oh rakwatin. So rakwa is a type of also a vessel, but this is made from jild, made from like skin. So it's also a container that they use skin to animal skin to make of this. For the mention fastanji, and the Prophet falyastanja, then the Prophet Islam will make will use this to after using the call of nature. So it shows regarding concern, that's the hadith that is mentioned by Abu Dawud. Then I mentioned that قال Ibn Hajar في فتح الباري, the hadith of Abu Dawud, إسناده صحيح, إسناده صحيح. Then I mentioned قلت, meaning concerning others, I mentioned that what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned regarding the hadith of Abu Huraira, that it is إسناده صحيح, that others have mentioned that in the hadith you have Sharik ibn Abdullah al-Qadi wa huwa sayy al-hifz. So you find that also وشيخه, and also we have Ibrahim ibn Jarir ibn Abdullah al-Bajri, that also mutakallim fi majhul. So you find that this hadith also there's some criticism. So you find the hadith that also some criticism of this also second hadith. So overall you find that the hadith that there's another hadith also that comes with this hadith, the hadith that is in the At-Tirmidhi or Ibn Majah, with tariq that goes back to Abu Huraira anhu, where he mentioned النبي عليه السلام قال نزلت هذه آية في آل كوبا. As we mentioned before, then it mentioned regarding قال كانوا يستنجوا بالماء نزلت هذه آية فيهم, that كانوا يستنجوا بالماء. So it mentioned that they used to purify themselves with water. It didn't mention حجارة. فنزلت هذه آية. So this ayah was revealed because of this method that how they will clean themselves, wash up themselves after use of the toilet. So some narration mention that they would use both. They were praised for combining between using of hijara and then after, which would be stones. Then after they would use water, and some narration mentioned that they were being praised because they use water to clean themselves. So you have that discussion. As for the hadith, I mentioned that gharib min hadha wajh, where At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah, when I mentioned hadith, he will state concerning that hadith is gharib, it is strange, min hadha wajh, or it comes with only that particular, from that particular tariqah, that particular path. Then also I mentioned that in this hadith, also this other hadith also, Yunus ibn Haris al-Thaqafi, al-Ta'i, Ta'ifi, and I mentioned that huwa, and also they are spoken about him, where some mention, which is the qawl, which is ashhur al-qawl, annahu fihi tad'if, that a person is weak. So these isnad, you have some discussion regarding this particular hadith. Also the hadith that we mentioned of Aidan في the hadith, you have Ibrahim ibn Abi Maymuna. So also you have the next in this hadith also Ibrahim ibn Abi Maymuna, and also they mentioned that majhul, that also one who's also majhul, with a terminology used by the people of hadith regarding that a person that either they know his name but they don't have much information about him, that would either make him that for or against him, or not many people have narrated upon him. So the word majhul, it takes that they're different. So you have that discussion regarding these ahadith that are mentioned. So they mentioned regarding concerning of latter times that of some of are mentioned that Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, when he discussed the hadith, that regarding concerning that these hadith are under some discussion, but he have cited regarding concerning that or some have cited regarding that of those who have authenticated hadith, they mention Sheikh Albani, that so overall regarding concern that these hadith are somewhat discussed, but those who have authenticated hadith, they mention that they have authenticated hadith based upon, they say, majmu' turuq. So I've also mentioned that, and they mentioned here regarding concern that Sheikh Albani mentioned, after discussing the hadith, they mentioned regarding that that Sheikh Albani mentioned the hadith have somewhat of authentic hadith, or all the hadith to be Hassan, based upon different shawahid. So based upon the shawahid, but some of these hadith, I mentioned the first hadith that is mentioned, which is the primer hadith, which is mentioned, that in Al-Bazzar, that you have a person who is said to be matruk, a person who is matruk in hadith, then his hadith is very weak, ضعيف جدا. Such a person whose label as such that isnad, it cannot be used to strengthen another hadith, nor other hadith can strengthen it. So overall, we have that discussion between the ulama. He mentioned Ibn Khuzaima, that authenticate hadith of Abu Huraira بدون ذكر الحجارة. So that's concerning that discussion regarding the hadith, those hadith that are mentioned. The next discussion of this hadith. So both the hadith that he mentioned here of Abu Huraira and Ibn Abbas, that those is asanid of those hadith that they are weak. Do they strengthen each other? And also look at a different shawahid, then that now become the area of discussion between the thing have to be looked into regarding passing a final judgment on the hadith. So as for the isnad of these hadith, then they have some weakness. As for looking at the shawahid of these hadith to see will they able to strengthen more so the second hadith. As for the first hadith of Ibn Abbas, then that hadith it is ضعيف جدا, so it's going to be somewhat difficult for anything else to give strength to it, or for it to strengthen another hadith because of the person who's matruk. So the hadith of matruk, then those hadith are somewhat disregarded. Those hadith are disregarded. So as for the fiqh of the hadith that have been mentioned here by the author, so he mentioned Ibn Abbas. We have spoke about Ibn Abbas prior, and also Abu Huraira radhiyallahu anhuma, that they have been spoken about before. So the discussion of the hadith is the discussion of the hadith that of this hadith that the people of Quba. So discuss concerning that Al-Quba is a area now like is now established in Medina. When the Prophet ﷺ, that he was coming to Medina from Al-Hijrah, that he stopped in Quba and then moved down into Medina, into we said the city, the center of the city. Then as for Al-Quba, it's just around from Medina, within now what we call the city of Medina. It's a part of the city of Medina, but from the Prophet ﷺ Masjid, it's around 3 miles from the Prophet ﷺ Masjid. So it's a short distance from the Prophet ﷺ Masjid, so not far from the Prophet ﷺ Masjid in Medina, and it's of those places concerning Masjid Al-Quba, that also of those places that a person will visit Medina, that it is recommended for the person to pray in Masjid Al-Quba. And the people of that area who initially used to live in Masjid Quba concerning in that area, they mentioned concerning Masakin, Bani, Amr, ibn Auf min al-Ansar. So Bani, so like the clan of Amr ibn Auf, they were the one who settled in the area of what is then Quba. Now, as we said, it's a part of the city of Medina. It's a part of the city of Medina. So as for the hadith, what can be taken from this hadith? That the hadith is discussed regarding concerning that, giving some for that those people that are praised, the people of Quba, being praised for when they would wash off themselves after toilet use, then they will use stones, and then they will use water. So a combination between both, removing the hard stuff first with something, then after using water to fully clean that area. So I mentioned regarding concerning this hadith, it discussed concerning this matter. So on this matter, you'll find regarding concerning the ulama that they have given concerning that, different methods and ways that a person in clean of himself that is allowed. So they mentioned concerning that, in clean of oneself, as to what is mentioned regarding istinja, that a person that washing up of himself after the use of the toilet and the area that has been used, they mentioned that there's 3 ways, or halat thalatha, that there's 3 ways. The first, that izalat al-najasa, the person removing of najasa from that area, min mahal al-kharij, by way of bitakhfifiha, by first bil-hijara, the person moving away the hard stuff, the person using first hijara to move away most of the stuff, thumma using of water after. So using stone first, or in these days today, we'll use paper and the likes, the person using toilet tissue and the likes. So those things are used first to remove off the art, to remove anything that is there first. Then after, the person use water to make sure that everything now, a water to wash away everything. So they mentioned that that's the best of the ways regarding the person clean of themselves, that the akmal is the best of ways that a person can use. And that's why Hadith mentioned the people of Quba was being praised in some narrations. It mentioned concerning that Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah ta'ala, can somewhat also explain that that's of the best of way concerning al-jam bayna al-hajar wal-ma afdal, that the better of the way to clean of oneself is the one that combines between the use of stone, then water. We said today, whatever is used as paper or tissues that are used to clean oneself, then the personal use of water after. I mentioned لأن الحجر يزيل ما غلط من النجاسة, so that that it removed concerning that the najasa that have been that anything that is remain, that rather than a person uses and directly, then you use the water then to just somewhat to clean away whatever remains. So that's the first way, and that's considered to be the better way to clean off oneself, combining between the use of hajar, then water, tissue, then water, combining between water with something else that will be used first. The second that they mention, اختصار على الماء وحده, that a person only using of water. So a second method of the person cleaning of oneself, washing up of oneself, is the person only using of water by itself. So there's nothing that precedes the water. So the person would use of his hands to and with the water to remove whatever is there. They mention وأفضل من اقتصار على حجارة, that is compared, that is the second method. It's a better method than that of the person only using just stone. So the use of the water by itself, it would consider to be the second in line of the in the way to the method of clean of oneself. Then as the water it cleans things, away. Water remove whatever is there. So water by itself will still remove whatever is there. Then I mentioned the third method, but with the water, the person's hands will still touch that area with some of the hard stuff that are still, some of the stuff that are still there, of some of the najasa that is still there, of the filth that is still there, or the waste that is still there. Then I mentioned the third method, اقتصار على حجارة وحده. So وحدها, so the person only using, and the person use of only stones, or the person maybe use toilet tissue only, or whatever else that a person may use, so the person is using of these things, then that also is allowed. So also this method also I mentioned, the ulama mentioned that this is allowed. The ulama mentioned that using of, and I mentioned here, اقتصار على الحجارة وحدها, if the person was only to use just hijara, stones, or the paper, the tissue, لا فرق, the dimension add, لا فرق في ذلك بين وجود الماء وعدمه. So whether water is present or not, if the person was only to use hijara, or the person only to use toilet tissue or paper, then this is suffice. This is sufficient. Whether water is present or not. So the person choose or decide only to use toilet tissue, then that's sufficient, even though he may have access to water. So this is by itself allowed. He mentioned بين السفر والحضر, where the person is traveling or not traveling, residential. In all cases, if the person was to use only toilet tissue or paper or hijara, stones, then this is sufficient. As we have discussed previously in the hadith of Salman, as we have discussed, we mentioned that Nahana Rasulullah عليه السلام أن نستنجي بأقل من ثلاثة الأحجار. The Prophet has mentioned only using dust, if one of the use stones, not to use less than 3 stones. So those are the different ways regarding of clean of oneself. So we have 3 methods: paper and water, or whatever is used before, then water follows, then only the use of water. Even if paper is allowed, even if paper is there. So the person, he has paper and water, and he chooses only to use the water by itself, that's allowed. Or the person that you have water and tissue, toilet tissues are present, and the person only choose to use only toilet tissue, then that's also allowed. Or the person choose to combine between both, then this also is said to be akmal, see the more the ideal method. So all these 3 methods are allowed by themselves or combined. Then I mentioned that of those who have explained Bulugh Maram, that I mentioned that Qal ibn Mundir of the ulama in his book Al-Awsat, Ibn Mundir rahimahullah in his book Al-Awsat, a very important book regarding fiqh of the Salaf. So a person the fiqh of the Salaf, he mentioned قال Ibn Mundir istinja bil ahjar jaizun, that for a person to clean themselves with ahjar, with stones, or we say slash toilet tissue, only jaizun, it is something which is allowed. لأن النبي عليه السلام سنه, because the Prophet Islam, he can somewhat establish this. وإستنجاء بالماء مستحب, and for the person to clean themselves with stones, with water, it is something which is mustahab. So the person so the ulama have mentioned that it is something which is allowed to use only paper or stone, but also if the person that to use water, it is something which is mustahab, and use of ahjar or paper jaiz. Then they mention a statement of An-Nawawi rahimahullah. They mention قال النووي اختلف الناس في هذه مسألة, that the people differ on this matter. والذي عليه جماهير من السلف والخلف, that the majority of the ulama of the salaf, of the early ulama and those who came after them, قال أجمع عليه أهل الفتوى من الأئمة الأمصار, and that also it is agreed upon by the أئمة الأمصار, the different regions, or the people who give fatwa, أن الأفضل, after what is الأفضل أن يجمع بين ما والحجر, that what is best and more recommended, highly recommended, is for the person to combine between stone and water, or paper or toilet tissue and water, then that is the best. فليستعمل الحجر أولا, so they mentioned the person will use the hajar أولا, then we use, as we said, that ثم يستعمل الماء, then he mentioned regarding concerning ليخفف النجاسة, so the hajar will use the paper to remove most of the najasa, so the person, less of the person and touching of the najasa, then the person will use the water after. Then I mentioned فإن أراد اختصار. Then he mentioned the next point, فإن أراد الاختصار, if the person wished just to restrict على أحدهما upon one of them, jaz, it is allowed. So the person chooses to use stones or water, one of them by themselves, it is allowed. It is jaz. اختصار على أيهما شاء, that the person able to use whichever one he chooses. سواء, also added سواء وجد آخر, so even if the other is present. ولم أو لم يجد, or it is not present. So if one, the other is present, the person going to choose use the water and paper is allowed, he can still choose only water. If the person chooses to use toilet tissue or paper or stone and water is present, he is okay to use only the stones or toilet paper. Then I mentioned, so that's concerning that matter regarding concerning what has been mentioned. فيجوز اختصار على الحجر مع وجود الماء ويجوز عكس. So the person can use whichever one, even the other is present. So that's concerning, in a nutshell or in summary, what have been mentioned by Ibn Mundhir, that mentioned by Ibn Mundhir and also An-Nawawi. So that's the aqwal of the ulama, that those are the three methods. The highest method, the more complete method, combining between stones or / toilet tissue, then water will be followed. Or the person choose to use one of them, stones or toilet tissue without water, then also jaiz. And if the person wants to use water by itself, it is mustahab. Then I mentioned, as clean of the person, clean of himself, it is wajib. The person to remove the filth and to clean of himself, then that is wajib. As for those methods, then all of which is jaiz, some more preferred than the others. Then also I mentioned that Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah in his book Zad al-Ma'ad, so Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah in his book Zad al-Ma'ad قال وكان من هديه عليه السلام, of the Prophet Islam method, or what he established, في قضاء الحاجة, in carrying out the call of nature and washing up after, and يستنجي بالماء تارة, that he would clean of himself with water at times, ويستجمر بأحجار تارة, and also use of stones at times, ويجمع بينهما تارة, and also again at times he would combine between both meaning stones and water. That when he mentioned this regarding Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah mentioned those three methods that the Prophet ﷺ went about regarding istinja, then Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, he mentioned أما أولان فثابتان, meaning concerned that as for the three methods he mentioned, the first method he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ, that using at times first water by itself, at times using stones by itself, those are the two methods. He mentioned as for these two methods, then they're thabit. We have clear text for those methods. Then I mentioned وَيَجْمَ بَيْنَهُمَا تَارَةً, as for combining between both stone and water, I mentioned أَمَّا الْجَمْ مِنْ فِعْلِهِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ فَلَمْ يُثْبِتْ, as for that the Prophet ﷺ, there's nothing been authenticated that have come back, been transmitted, reliable upon the Prophet ﷺ, that he combined between both. There's nothing been authenticated or been reliable, transmitted upon the Prophet ﷺ, that he combined between both. Then he mentioned وَلَوْ ثَبَتْ, that even been authenticated, لَمَّا أَحْتَاج مَنْ يَقُول, that it is not, it wouldn't be, that mention that it also wouldn't be served as the evidence for those say أن الأفضل الجمع بينهما إلى استدلال بالحديث القبة. So overall, that he mentioned that also that even though the Prophet had not been authenticated upon the Prophet ﷺ that he did so, then also it still have a still ranking of combining between both. And that's also the practice you might find with most today, especially those who live in cities or even in villages and small cities, that's the general practice of the people of our time. That they'll combine between both. That's that's of the practice of the people of our time. So that's concerning that hadith and what it discussed regarding those ahkam relating to what we have just covered, which is the person in cleaning of himself, washing of himself, then it is wajib, tahara min al-najasa, that the person that clean up that area, it is wajib after use of the toilet. As for the person that using, and that applies to both number one, number two, the person wants to use water by itself for the person that urinating to clean up that area, then water by itself is sufficient. Or the person choose to use and most to wipe by using a stone. The men just use a stone or paper to wipe off that area, then that's sufficient. Or the woman that may use toilet tissue to wipe up that area, then that's sufficient. Or the back. So the person wants to use only stone for the back, or the person wants to use toilet tissue for the back, or the person wants to combine between toilet tissue and water, then also that's the best. That's the more recommended way. But all those ways are valid, and the person, if he will do so, then is allowed to make wudu and pray. But we consider to be that you have cleaned that area, which is wajib and a must to be done. So we'll just add a masala that regarding, as I mentioned about toilet use, that of those who have explained about, I mentioned that that regarding concern that as it been authenticated upon the Prophet ﷺ, that he used combined between both jambaina hijara والماء, that they mentioned Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the ulama of contemporary times who specialize in hadith, قال, in one of those who have explained the book I've mentioned, لم يثبت بالجم بين إجارة والماء شيء, that so they mentioned that there's nothing, but they mentioned al-yasl al-jam bayna hijar wa ma ila hadd al-bida. So the next question, so upon the Prophet ﷺ, there's nothing been authenticated that he combined between the use of then hijara, which is stones, and ma, and water. Then the next question that some people asked was su'ila, he was asked, rahimahullah ta'ala, hal yasil al-jam, so the people who combine between both of stones and water, or paper, today paper and water, is this an act of bid'ah? Because the Prophet ﷺ didn't do it, and the hadith about it are not authentic. It would be a bid'ah. They mention, they mention قال لا يصل, it wouldn't be considered to be an act of bid'ah. So a person might say the Prophet ﷺ himself didn't do it, so it's an act of bid'ah when it was available. The Prophet ﷺ had water and also he had stone, but didn't combine between both, from what I've reached regarding any narrations. So if a person wants to do so, when the Prophet said the Prophet ﷺ had those things available, stones were available, and most of the time that we mentioned about water being taken for him to use. So it shows that, and you have asked for stones in some cases of some hadith. So both were available and never combined between both, from what have reached us by way of narrations authentically. So it would be considered to be a bid'ah for a person to do so. That the ulama mentioned that's not the case. That's not the case. So for a person to say it's an act of bid'ah, then he's going against what the ulama have stated. And there's no legitimate alim who have said that that act is an act of bid'ah. No legitimate alim have said that to do so is an act of bid'ah. So for a person to come to that conclusion, then he's going against the aqwal of the ulama of the past up until today's. So as we said, that a matter to be discussed, that they have included concerning the bab of qada al-haja, adab qada al-haja, told you to mention regarding hukum bawl qa'im. What's the ruling on a person urinating standing? So urinating, but the person is standing. What's the ruling regarding this? And on this matter, you have mentioned here, جاء عن عذيفة ابن يمان. So جاء عن حذيفة ابن يمان رضي الله عنه في الصحيحين in Bukhari and Muslim أنه رأى رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام, we saw the Prophet عليه السلام بال قائما. We saw the Prophet Islam, so he saw the Prophet Islam urinating standing, and the hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim. Then second to this, we have قد جاء عائشة. It's been narrated by المؤمنين عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها أنها قال man, the way she has stated, من تحدثكم, the one who have narrated من حدثكم أن رسول الله عليه السلام بال قائم فقد كذب. That anyone who have narrated to you, transmit to you, or anyone have said to you that the Prophet ﷺ have urinated while standing, then he has lied. He's incorrect. ما بال, she continued, ما بال رسول الله عليه السلام قائما منذ أنزل عليه القرآن. The Prophet ﷺ have not urinated while standing since the descending of the Quran to him, since the Quran being revealed to him. And he mentioned أخرجه, the hadith, so that's the hadith At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah bi isnadin sahih. And the hadith of isnad, he mentioned the hadith of At-Tirmidhi, it is sahih. So we have those two hadiths. The hadith of Hudayfa ibn Yaman, that he said that he witnessed, he saw the Prophet ﷺ urinating standing. Then we have a second hadith with the hadith of Aisha anha, where she mentioned, where she said, not anyone who have narrated upon you, have mentioned to you that the Prophet ﷺ urinated while standing, then this is a lie. Kadhib. Or kadhib, sometimes the ulama, they mean either lie or it means another akhta, or you have made an error. So whichever way we should translate, then she mentioned kind of somewhat to reinforce that, to mention that the Prophet ﷺ, since the Quran was being revealed, while the Quran was being revealed to him, he never urinated while standing. So those are in the hadith. We said the first hadith of Hudayfa in the Bukhari and Muslim. So the hadith of they mentioned the second hadith in the At-Tirmidhi, that the hadith of Aisha, and it is found in, we said in Tirmidhi, the hadith is Sahih. So how we harmonize between those two hadith? What's the way to approach regarding the ruling pertaining to urinating in a standing, or the person is standing? If you're standing and to urinate, is this something allowed or not allowed? Because of those two hadith, or the meaning of those two hadith, that the ulama mentioned that it showed that hadith of Aisha, it shows regarding to know that she's narrating from what she knew and what she thought, and that is a description of the Prophet ﷺ concerning that in most case that he would urinate sitting, not standing. And that's why Aisha can assume that what is the thing that is generally known of him, the Prophet ﷺ, the thing that is generally known of him and commonly known, that he urinated while in a sitting position, not a standing position. And that's the hadith of Aisha. As for the hadith that regarding Hudayfa, then it shows the permissibility. But that was the thing that he did, and the case consider that not often. So you have, that's the case of not often, a few maybe case, as I say here in a few circumstances, but the general common practice to sit, but on occasion, as Hudayfa witnessed, that he did so. So it shows a general, that is something which is said to be jaiz. Mustahab, standing, but it is allowed for the person, according to the hadith of Hudayfa, to do so standing. Then I mentioned regarding concerning that Ibn Mundhir, rahimahullah ta'ala, that I've mentioned in the book Al-Awsat, ثبت عن جماعة من أصحاب رسول عليه السلام أنهم بالوا قياما, that Ibn Mundhir mentioned concerning of a companion of the Prophet عليه السلام who urinated standing. ممن ثبت ذلك عنه, according to those who have been authenticated upon them from the Sahaba. So amongst those who have been mentioned about the Sahaba that have urinated while standing, that they mention Umar ibn Khattab, Ali ibn Abi Talib, ibn narrated transmitted Ali ibn Abi Talib. Also ثبت ذلك عن زيد ibn Thabit, ibn Umar, Sal ibn Sa'ad, also been transmitted upon Anas, also been narrated upon Abu Huraira, And also they mention Urwa ibn Zubair and Muhammad ibn Hassan. Of those who, so it says, of those who cannot saw, they mention regarding concerns that in most cases, after mentioned, قلت هذه آثار عن الصحابة كلها صحيحة عنهم إلا أثر أنس وأبي هريرة. So after all the mentioned regarding concerning Umar, Ali, Zayd ibn Thabit, Ibn Umar, Salih ibn Sa'd, it's been authentic except for the case of Anas wa Abu Huraira. You have some transmission that they did it, but the narration upon them is not authentic. But as for the others, Umar, Ali, Ibn Umar, that's authentic on them. Upon them, regarding they did of this act. Then I mentioned, قال Ibn Munzir, يبول جالسا أحب إلي. That what is more beloved is for the person to يبول جالسا, for it is more beloved for a person to urinate while sitting, in a sitting position, not in a standing position. لثابت النبي عليه السلام, because it's something been authenticated upon the Prophet عليه السلام, أنه بال جالسا, the Prophet عليه السلام that he urinated جالسا. ولأن أهل العلم لا يختلفون فيه, and the ulama, there's no disagreement regarding the person urinating while sitting. There's no khilaf between the ulama on this matter. ولا أنها, and also they haven't أنها أنبول قائما, and also they haven't forbid for a person to urinate standing. They haven't forbid for a person to urinate standing. لثبوت hadith Hudayfa, because of the hadith of Hudayfa, because of the authenticity of the hadith of Hudayfa. So that's the position of the ulama that he mentioned regarding concerning that the matter of this is considered found in Majmu' and also Al-Mughni. Then he mentioned قلت ولكن لا ينبغي له أن يبول في موضع. Then he mentioned a different matter, Al-Sulb. So overall, that the aqwal of the ulama is the proof regarding that this matter regarding urinating standing, that the ulama is of the view that it is something which is mustahab, preferred for a person, and more beloved for a person to do so sitting, as in the hadith of Aisha, that the Prophet Islam, that is common practice was to sit. But as for the hadith of Hudayfa, then it proved that occasion that he stand. So based upon this, as mentioned, he mentioned لأن أهل العلم لا يختلفون فيه, regarding the Prophet Islam sitting. ولا أنها أنبول قائم, and he mentioned that as for him, he doesn't see it as something which is forbidden to be done because of hadith of Hudayfa, So that inshallah ta'ala will end this discussion regarding matters pertaining to this bab of Qada al-Haja. He mentioned a few other points. He mentioned urinating in holes. A person might see a hole in the ground, is allowed for the person to urinate. So he mentions, so you have those matters also discussed. You have those matters that are discussed with ulama. It's something which is disliked to be done. It is something which is disliked to be done. So that inshallah ta'ala will end regarding some of these matters that relates to this discussion of Bab Adab Qada al-Haja, as mentioned in the book Bulugh al-Maram by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala. So in ending with this matter, that's of the final hadith regarding those two hadith, or the last of those hadith regarding this particular chapter or this particular bab that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah have mentioned. So regarding this chapter of Bab Qada al-Haja, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he mentioned in total, depending of how the one make the count, he mentioned according to Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, he mentioned over 22 hadith. So he mentioned 22 hadith. So as some of those hadith, some may count, like for example the hadith, these two hadith as one hadith, and some may separate them as they see one hadith transmitted by Ibn Abbas, so that's a separate hadith, as hadith are counted generally by the Sanad. So they see the hadith of Ibn Abbas as one hadith, and the hadith of Abu Huraira as a separate hadith, even though the meaning is same, and a slight difference in the wording, but they will see them as two separate hadith, not as one hadith. That's the count of al-hadith. So overall, that's the hadith that he mentioned in this chapter, over 20 something hadith, 22 hadith relating to Bab Qada al-Haja. With that, inshallah ta'ala, we have now completed that chapter, and we'll move on to what he discussed as the next chapter, and that will be discussed in upcoming lectures. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذه إلى السبيل والآخر دعوانا الحمد لله آمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay.